questions.
Good morning, folks. Here it is. It's Wednesday, September 23rd.
Third.
Yes, and it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and things are happening too fast, and it's hard to adjust to everything that's going on, but we're going to do our best to offer different perspectives on the events of the last, well, we could do 24 hours and take up 3 shows, couldn't we? But anyway, we're going to start with a question. Oh, I didn't introduce. In the left chair today is Mark Guerringue, newspaper publisher, and he's a regular here every 4 weeks or so. He's on, and this comes from our producer. Neither of us has seen it, and let's see. Do you think it would be more politically beneficial for the Senate Republicans to confirm a new Supreme Court Justice, A, before the November election, or B, between the November election and Inauguration Day? And then there's a second part to the question, which says, has your opinion on whether a new justice be appointed during an election year changed since Senate Republicans refused to give a hearing for nominee Merrick Garland in 2016? So first of all, we'll do the first part. Do we think that it would be more beneficial for Senate Republicans to confirm? So I assume that asking if the benefit would accrue to Republicans before the election or between the election and Inauguration Day. You want to grab that?
Okay, I'll start. I would say that, this is one of those great examples of our system at work, the American system. Because fortunately, we don't live on a communist regime or, all the dictatorships in the world. So we have this imperfect system, this rough and tumble system, and it's always about self-interest. So, and when is there a backlash against self-interest? So with this, the original sin with the Supreme Court was really done by Harry Reid in 2013 when he changed it from 60 vote to get a Supreme Court to a majority, simple majority.
Eliminated the filibuster.
Yeah. So that's to me, I'm a liberal guy, and that's the original sin. So then you have last year where Lindsey Graham, they stopped, the Mitch McConnell stopped the nomination of Obama's nominee, Garland, in his full last year of presidency.
Yeah. 6 or 8 months.
Well, it was more than
before.
6 or 8. It was way into the 9 or 10, I think. But
Yeah.
It was definitely a ways. It certainly seemed plenty of time, and that seems a little cynical. And then, of course, now here we are with only 40 days left to replace Ginsburg, and it's the self-interest part. If you're a run-of-the-mill Republican and you put up with Trump so that you get stacked to Supreme Court with conservatives, this is your chance to do it. So you go for it, right? So
Yeah.
from your point of view as a card-carrying conservative, I'd say do it. But there's self-interest involved. So you get Susan Collins, right? Everybody has self-interest. So she doesn't favor doing the nominating before the election because she's underwater in Maine anyway. And if she did, she'd definitely lose.
If she voted to confirm
Before
a conservative
Yeah.
Supreme Court justice before the election, you think that her opponent would win?
So then you
Would definitely win. Even she's ahead in the polls now by about 5 to 8 points.
Who
something
is?
like that? Sarah Gideon.
Oh yeah. So that's her self-interest. Then you get someone like Lindsey Graham. So politics is full of hypocrisies, of course, on both sides and this and that. So and everybody knows these words when he says, "I want you to use my words against me. If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, which would be this year, you can say, Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make the nomination. And you can use my words against me and you'd be absolutely right." So, let me just finish my point.
Yeah.
So he's making a calculated risk. He can get away with that, and I don't fault him for that. It just seems like the height of hypocrisy, But that's a judgment call. But he's also being challenged. Like he's got actually a close race in South Carolina now. So, and Lindsey Graham is. So there's a chance he could lose. So our wonderful system could be that by being so hypocritical, it could backfire. And then one more point is that if the Republicans ram this through after not allowing Obama's nominee to go through, then if everything is fair and love, war, and politics, then if the Democrats win and Biden wins, they're going to expand the court and add 2 more members so they can have the majority. So where does it stop?
Right. They're looking at expanding to 15 justices from 9, and then, as somebody said, well, from then the next president, if it's the opposite party, would go to 20 and 25, and and is there an end to it? And I think somebody 100 years ago made that sort of a prediction, and it hasn't expanded for about 100. Well, let's see, here we are, more than 100 years. I think it was 1860s or so, somewhere in the late 1800s. That's how long we've had 9 justices, and I don't remember how many we had before that or at whose emphasis it expanded. But there it is. But when you were quoting Lindsey Graham, key phrase you said was the next president. Now, after November 3rd, there could be a next president,
right,
or we could have the same one. And also, when Obama nominated Garland, he was a lame duck. So we knew there was
No, he wasn't a lame. Well, he was a lame duck. Yeah, he was a lame duck in his last 4 years. He was a lame duck. Yeah.
So there was going to be a new president because he couldn't run again.
Right.
But now Trump is running again, and so he has a good chance of getting reelected. So when what's her name? When Ruth Ginsburg said she wanted to be nominated by the next president, well, then could take over 4 years to get a next president because Trump could win again.
Well, you're saying that, but obviously the context isn't like literally the next president who's not President Trump. It's the next president, meaning after November 3rd. That's the next president. They're not saying the next president who follows Trump, whether it's 4 years, 8 years, or 12 years. They're
not thinking clearly when they make their statements.
Well, that's what
they're politically grandstanding, as you said, and they're looking to justify a position they would have taken anyway, and they're looking for some sort of rationalization that they think would sell to the public. And both sides, as you know, have done this. The Graham statement, and you can quote me on this, and I'm going on record because so he made it even worse for himself. But just about all of them, when Garland was put on hold by Mitch McConnell, every Democrat leader, and most of them are still holding those positions, said just exactly what the Republicans of today are saying, and they're saying the opposite now. And so if there's hypocrisy, it's rampant on all sides. And are we surprised? We're not. I'm certainly not. I don't think you are either.
But that's the best. I mean, that's what's great about our system, is that we all operate. I mean, individually, politicians, we all operate in our self-interest. There's a certain amount of hypocrisy in everything, and at some point, it rises to a level where it isn't acceptable. I mean, people kind of generally lie, but if you lie too much, you get caught. I mean, you can go through stop signs all day, but if you go through 80 miles an hour through North Conway, it's too much. So there is a balance there, and
there is.
And some people, there are some politicians who wouldn't say what Lindsey Graham said because they have a higher level that I would call of integrity, and you'd be careful not to say that. So I guess I'm saying I agree. I think we're both agreeing. That's what politicians do all the time. I forget in the Kavanaugh hearings. I forget who it was, Manchin, who's the Democrat
from West Virginia.
And he waffled and waffled and waffled, and you knew he was just waiting to see which way the tea leaves were because he's a Democrat in a Republican state.
Yeah.
So it happens all the time, but the question is when is it too much? And then there's a pushback.
Yeah, of all the politicians who have been making these statements 4 years ago and now again today, taking the opposite position, they're not careful with their words, as I pointed out about Graham, the next president, and also Ginsburg allegedly said it on her deathbed to her niece, and the next president also. The one who's been careful with his wording was Mitch McConnell, when he said it in 2016 and when he said it now, because you have a Senate of the opposite party. And so the president is doing his constitutional function of making an appointment, and the Senate is doing its constitutional function of advice and consent. We're not consenting to this nomination, which is their constitutional right, duty to either consent or not consent.
Right.
So he said, but he did mention opposite party in 2016, and now 2020, it's the same party controls both the White House and the Senate. So he said, we're doing it. He was careful.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I have more and more respect for him. I really didn't like him, saw him as a rhino, not conservative enough to suit me.
Oh,
for years, and now, especially on the immigration issue, he would not refuse to hear bills that would restrict, really actually build a wall on the southern border before Trump. This was an issue that many of us conservatives were very annoyed at, and both he and what's the speaker from Wisconsin there, Paul Ryan, neither of them. I had contempt for both of them for how they handled those bills.
Well, McConnell's certainly a master of the Senate and all that.
He is.
He
is, and I got to respect that.
And politics is all that, and partly it's luck. I mean, this is the third Supreme Court justice in 4 years. I mean, you can go 20 years, 10 years without any change.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
True.
And that's what the Republicans wanted, and it's more important to the Republicans and Democrats because of the social issues and abortion. But yeah, it's a huge thing, and I guess it's still ready to unfold. Now, one thing about it, the first case is sort of related, like the first, and then the Democrats are going to say, look, we can't do it now. We need to wait till after the election for the next president because of health care. Because one of the big cases coming up right off the bat is that Texas case. Yeah. And apparently, since the whatever decision was that eliminated the mandate for health care to be part of Obamacare, what the court said in Texas was that because of that, because it was zeroed out, therefore the rest of it, and that became unconstitutional, then the rest of the Obamacare should be dismantled.
Right.
So how do you think about I know this is going into healthcare here for a minute, but what do you think about the dismantling of Obamacare?
Okay, well, now you're talking about healthcare.
Yes, I guess I am making a segue.
So let's finish the second part of this question first, and then if you want to, we can go into that. Has your opinion on whether a new justice be appointed during an election year changed since Senate Republicans refused to give a hearing? Well, I guess we did address that. Okay. So what's my position on health care? I believed it was unconstitutional to begin with because
the mandate.
The Obamacare, which essentially, and that part of it, the mandate, because Congress has the power to tax it. Let's see. It doesn't have the power to force somebody to buy something. But if you call it a tax, and this is what Chief Justice Roberts did.
Yeah.
He said he changed it from. Well, let's see, I don't know what I'd call it before. And he said, so that it can meet constitutional muster, he modified the bill.
Yeah, so it's like a levy or something else.
Yeah, whatever. And that is what is challenged by Texas. So now Roberts, clearly, people think he's a conservative, but that's when he started to tip his hand that I'm not so conservative as you think I am.
Well, the other side of it, people are saying he's not conservative, he's just following the law. I mean, he's very much about the integrity of the Supreme Court, and so that what he's doing is technically following things. Like the one with the was it the last? And I'm not up to speed on this now, but the last abortion decision, I think he followed it, even though he'd be prone to be anti-Roe v. Wade, but he kept that because it had already been a precedent. So to him, how the court works is more important than the politics behind. But that's another discussion.
No, not really. He thinks precedent over the wording, original intent of the Constitution, and the strict reading of it as it was written by the founders. And I think he lacks courage also.
Oh, I don't think so. Anyway, okay.
And he another thing he said, they tipped his hand, it's very clear now that we have Bush judges, we have Obama judges, we have Trump judges, and Roberts came out with this asinine statement that there are no such things. Everybody just goes according to the letter of the law. I mean, I'm surprised he could say that with a straight face, so that he got away with it. Because look at the hullabaloo we're in right now. And it's only been, what, since last Friday that the woman died.
Yeah, but we know that history is full of judges who was the famous suitor, like Bush, George Walker Bush nominated Souter, and he thought he was going to be a conservative, and he wasn't.
That's right.
So it's not, I don't think you can, I think it's easy for us to put him in conservative, or, I mean, sometimes the way they decide favors a conservative point of view or a liberal point of view, but I guess I give them a little more credit. I do think there are some that have a bias, and I think and I agree with you that over time it seems like it's become more politicized because there are litmus tests, for sure. So.
Well, also, and you'll notice, Souter is an example, Kennedy is an example. There are many other examples of conservative presidents who have appointed judges whom they thought were conservatives and have gone over to the other side. And that Roberts is in process, I think, right now.
Well, and I would argue that...
But nobody goes from liberal to conservative. I can't think of a single example.
And why does that? Why do you think that is? It's because
they are iconoclasts.
No, they're not iconoclasts, because society tilts left, and what we're doing is we're shedding ourselves of some of the old bad laws, whether they're Jim Crow or Brown versus education or all that kind of stuff. So you got to remember,
they
Tom.
become enlightened when they become
enlightened.
liberal.
It's just better. It's just they're more accurate. They're more fair.
Better.
Yeah, I mean, it's just society tilts left. I mean, we used to have Jim Crow laws. We used to have slavery. We used to have women couldn't vote. I mean, those benchmark decisions moved us, quote unquote, to the left. Some people think that's progress, Tom. I know you'd rather be back in the 50s, but with all that, or who knows, the 30s or the 20s. But that's progress.
I remind you that it was Democrats who had slaves and Republicans who freed them. And
yeah, but
I know you're going to say
we know this. We know the conservatives. The conservatives have always been the conservatives in the South. They switched parties from the Democrats to the Republicans in the Southern strategy by Nixon. We know that when he was playing the race card.
I don't know that. You claim to know that, but you claim to know it with regard to race relations and slavery and civil rights. I don't see it in that context. I do see it as conservative Democrats, and there used to be such an animal. Yeah. There isn't anymore. The Democrat Party has no more conservatives.
No, it changed. The conservatives who were conservatives.
You think they made progress by doing so. I don't. I think they regressed, and that spit me out of, even though I was like-minded, except for the abortion issue. I've always seen abortion as murdering a child in the womb. And even when I was a liberal, even when I was a leftist, I always saw it.
Well, you have a good
way.
Catholic background, so it's understandable.
I do.
Yeah.
And now we're about to see confirmation hearings, during which I expect that since they can't go after, as far as I know, can't go after Amy Barrett, and it looks like she'll be the nominee for sexual reasons, or she seems to have. I'd be surprised if there were anything in the background. So now they're going to go after her for being a Catholic, much the way Feinstein did when she was up for confirmation and in the position she has now as an appellate judge. And the dogma lives largely within you. She is an actual practicing Catholic. You remember, Biden's a Catholic, John Kerry's a Catholic, Pelosi's a Catholic. But they don't practice the religion. I mean, they go to church, I suppose. They receive communion, in my opinion, for political reasons, and and tout their Catholicism because they think it'll help them on election day. But this is a woman who practices it. Scalia was somebody who practiced it. and they're unusual.
Well, because religion, I mean, Pence is like that too. He says religion, God, he reports to God before he reports to the country, you know, and that's scary to me. I think that we're not ruled by God, because we have religious freedom, but we're ruled by the law of the land. So when people put God in front of the law in our country, that scares me, and she's one of those.
Well,
so, and we know how she's going to vote, but.
We know how she's going to vote on Roe v. Wade, yes. But people, and that is the biggest issue, isn't it? I mean, Roe v. Wade, although I think people misunderstand it, Roe v. Wade, if it's repealed, very little is going to change regarding abortion law.
No, and I can't.
Because the states are going to be, it'll go back to them. And some states, very few states are going to outlaw it, probably in the Dakotas and maybe some southern states, but every other state is going to stay the way it is.
Unfortunately, and maybe Bill could Google this in 2 seconds, because I'm not up on it, but I do know that Roe v. Wade gives a lot of cover for states, and it makes it a lot easier. It's going to make it a lot easier for states to flip and ban abortions, and I just don't have it. I just don't have it.
Right, it will.
It's going to be a lot easier, right? So Roe v. It's not the same.
Roe v. Wade said there's a constitution. Well,
yeah,
we can adjudicate it. I mean, it goes back to an earlier ruling from Connecticut, Griswold versus the state of Connecticut, in which it said that the people have a constitutional right to birth control.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I'm not going to object to that on its merits, but I will object to it on the constitutional grounds, because I think the emanations from the penumbra of a constitutional right to privacy found in the Fourth Amendment. Well, I know what the Fourth Amendment says, and there's nothing in there about a right to privacy. The word privacy doesn't even exist. It hints at it. You know, emanations from the penumbra, which is a pretty vague statement. But you don't base you don't say that there's a constitutional right based on such flimsy language. It's not in there. And then Roe v. Wade is based on that Griswold versus Connecticut. So it's just bad law, period,
well, I mean,
regardless of how you think about either issue.
All right, I'm not going to argue that, because you're an expert in the Constitution and I'm not, so I can't argue. I don't have a good response to that. But I do know that the Griswold thing, that's how precedent is set. I mean, we interpret, and it's whether you're a strict constitutionalist or you do the interpretation. So that would be my counter to that, is that Griswold decision that's how it was interpreted, and now we have precedent, and that's why people like Roberts will say, we have precedent, therefore we got to follow that. So the different interpretations of how we view the Supreme Court.
Original wording trumps.
You're a strict constitutionalist. I mean,
trumps precedent.
But let me just go back quickly to the, regardless, because I was getting on the health care, because this is going to be a big case. Okay. Like, to me, that's way bigger than the abortion thing, because I do think, I'm not going to get into it. You've already said your piece about abortion, and I accept it. But I do think this health care thing is big. So I guess I'm asking you, not about the mandate, but you're on Medicare, right?
I am, yeah.
So I'm on Medicare, unfortunately. I mean, not fortunately, but I'm a newbie. And which was interesting, because I went to get my flu shot. I don't usually get them, and they said, because I've been on Medicare for 2 months now, so which means I turned 65 2 months ago. So that the hospital, I said, you're 65, you should get the super dose of the flu shot. And I said, wait a minute, I didn't change very much in 2 months. I'm going to take the regular dose. But anyway, but what do you think about, I guess, in a lack of a better term, just Medicare for all, or dismantling Obamacare, and leaving it up to the competitive market?
We essentially, Medicare, you have Medicare and you have Medicaid.
Yeah.
And Medicare applies to some handicapped people and to those of us who are classified elderly.
No, we're not elderly. I don't think 65 is elderly.
Well, that was its intent. Okay. So, old people.
Older.
Acutely mature. How's that?
Not young.
Not young. Right. Okay. That's a step toward socialism, and I would be against it.
You're against the
pre-existing conditions.
Pre-existing conditions
are a little different.
Well, that's Obamacare. That's a big, huge thing. It
is a big, huge thing, and I have a pre-existing condition that I've had since I was 33, and it has changed my life, because I've had to stay in teaching, and when I would otherwise have gone on to something else, and because nobody else would take me because I'm expensive on the health care plan. So yeah, it does. That's not the case anymore. Hasn't been. But then I was stuck. And it's just. So I understand the issue. And I've had to adjust my life around that. We all have to adjust our lives around it. I don't look to government to fix my personal issues, and I don't think we should. Most of healthcare problems are lifestyle related, obesity and other kinds of things that you go to emergency rooms and they're filled with people like this, and because they think that it doesn't cost them anything. It's going to shorten their life. It's going to, affect their quality of life certainly, but they don't think they're going to die. They can always go get fixed, and on somebody else's dime. And so there's a disincentive to do the disciplinary things, to lose weight, to exercise, to change your diet, that kind of thing. And that's where I see us going. I see more and more fat people around everywhere. Is it okay to say fat, or is that a hate crime? I don't know. There's just overweight people, especially in Maine. Holy mackerel. They're just everywhere. And that didn't used to be the case.
Yeah.
And I think this dependence, losing responsibility for your own health, I think, is a big part of that. And thinking government's going to take it over for you.
Well, I mean, there are some things, I'll tell you just on the ground, look how it affected, I'm surprised you said that, because look how it affected your whole life about the idea that you had to stay as a teacher to get health care. That, to me, this would invigorate our economy so much, because your story is very, very common about how it prevents people from moving around independently.
Yeah.
And I look at it, we have an employer-based system. So you say, oh, you don't want the government to take care of it. Well, why is it my responsibility to take care of it as an employer?
Well, it isn't.
It is.
You've taken it on.
Yeah.
But did you have a choice?
No. Right. I absolutely did have a choice. But in this modern world of, if you want someone to work for you, you have to provide health insurance. That's just the way our culture is. And that's the way it is in business. Small businesses don't, but that's just part of the package, and it's part of our culture. And so, and if we didn't, but specifically, if we didn't have Obamacare, because we have a complicated plan, but some people get subsidized from that Obamacare. If we didn't, I wouldn't be able to offer decent health insurance to people. They wouldn't. If
so it's helped you business-wise?
Helped me. It's allowed us to survive. And it's just not fair. So that's that level. But if you're saying, if we went back to the old way, so there's two parts. One is the pre-existing conditions, and that really is a huge part of Obamacare. The other part is that insurance companies have to offer certain services. Basically services that you can't just pick and choose, where you got to offer the basic stuff. And then the third part, is this affordability and these subsidies, and is it fair to have someone who's making $35,000 or $40,000 now can qualify for a subsidy, so their health insurance could be a couple $100 a month. In the marketplace, it would be $800 or $900 a month. They'd be paying $10,000 a year out of their $35,000. Like, they literally couldn't exist. So this idea of socialism and all that stuff, this is about making our country more dynamic, and I do think it's a responsibility. If we live, our society is that we don't allow people to just starve. We don't allow people to just die in the streets. Hospitals have to take them in. So it is a societal issue. There are certain things that are a societal issue. We have the military as a societal issue. That's an exclusive provider by the government. We have police and public works and all that stuff. Is that socialism? Because it's better, because it's providing a service to us as a country, and we give that authority to the federal government. And so I think health care is such a huge part of what defines a successful country and a rich country, is that we should have universal health care. I don't think we're going to get to it right now, and I think we should have incentives, and there's a whole panoply of ideas of how that kind of stuff works. But to throw out Obamacare now would be a disaster. A disaster.
You think it would be a disaster for our economy?
Yeah, people, therefore the economy. 20 million people would be off the rolls to begin with, and they'd be showing up at the emergency rooms, same old story.
Well,
and it's a balance.
It's a complicated issue. It is. I don't think people have a right to health care. I don't think people have a right to housing. I don't think they have. The rights are what you see in the Bill of Rights, and that's it. And I don't. You can. A right to abortion and the Roe v. Wade, the Constitution. There can be no end to this. abortion is, I would argue, I guess you don't agree with this, but I think it has been, since it passed in 1973, the single biggest divisive issue in the United States.
No, I don't agree with that, but
Well,
it is to you. I mean, I don't.
That's how I see it.
Believe it or not, I go 364 days a year without thinking about it until I talk to you.
okay.
Or maybe it's every 29 days when we talk.
All right. I guess I've been thinking about it now because that's what this confirmation issue is, and it's also a big part of why I supported Trump and why Trump got elected. Is not only he listed his Supreme Court justices that he would appoint, and that really swayed me, and now he's following through on it, and I think it's going to help him when he appoints it. And I think it'll happen. He looks like they got the votes.
Romney already flipped.
Yeah.
I mean, not flipped, but he sided with the Republicans.
Yeah. So I just think it's helped the conservative. It's the biggest issue for conservatives.
Yeah.
But nobody should take a position on. I don't think anybody should take a position on abortion until they research how it is done. And I don't think most people understand how it is done. From the earliest times, 6 weeks or 12 weeks, to just before birth. There are only two kinds of abortion that I know of that don't involve dismembering of the preborn
All
child.
right. Let's not.
There's only two.
Okay. So we're going to enter it.
If you look into that, nobody should take a position for or against until they see how.
We'll leave it at that.
That's the statement I want to make.
That's okay. Okay, let's move on. So you are against you're okay with dismantling, even though you've been a benefit of Medicare and taxpayer-funded health insurance pretty much all your life. You're okay.
For 5 years, I paid $1,500 a month for health insurance. I retired at 60 instead of 65, and so I had to pay my whole health insurance.
Maine didn't give you health insurance?
No.
Well, our school
they
system.
gave me 20% of my individual coverage, but I still had to pay for my wife's.
Oh, well, you had to pay for your wife.
I had to pay $1,500 a month for the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's welcome to the world.
Well, yeah, I did it for 5 years.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
Well, it can be done to the people who have the money.
I'm not a rich man. I mean, I'm a retired teacher and a property manager and a writer that doesn't make very much money at writing, and making a little at photography.
Asking for a raise? You're asking for a raise for your
I'll take one if you offer it, yes. Yes.
All righty, so what's the next subject? What else you got?
All right. I have a quote here from Garland herself in 2016. I think this helps. I mean, did I say Garland? I meant
McConnell?
R.G. Ginsburg. And she said to the New York Times, asked if the Senate had an obligation, this is from the New York Times reporting, asked if the Senate had an obligation to assess Judge Garland's qualifications, Ginsburg's answer was immediate. That's their job, she said. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the president stops being a president in his last year. Interesting from her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, George Soros.
Okay, just quickly, this is what Bill ran out, and this is Google, of course it's right. But this is about the abortion thing. How much
it's from Google, so
well,
it's right?
Cool. It's anything from Google's right.
Oh.
I'm being funny here.
Okay, all right.
Said, like you say, it says, in the absence of Roe v. Wade, a woman's access to abortion would be affected by the state she lives in. I guess it does involve women, which is always interesting how men are so involved, are so interested in controlling what women do. But according to the Center for Reproductive Rights, 23 states have the potential to ban abortion outright if Roe v. Wade is overturned.
23 states have the potential. Who said that?
Well, it's Center for Reproductive Rights. It doesn't say...
That's a Democrat organization.
Yeah. It doesn't say 29 states now have enough restrictions to be considered hostile to abortion rights by the research group, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't say exactly how Roe v. Wade protects women now, and I don't have that answer. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, the answer is they said no state can legislate against it. There's a constitutional right.
Right. So you're saying so you're saying, and thank you for making my point. I didn't know that specifically. and you're saying that Roe v. Wade, once it goes away, it doesn't change much because it's up to the states. But in fact,
According to
Wade,
that, those people are trying to say, it would.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it will change it for some states, certainly.
Yeah.
I think a minority. They said, well, 23 is a minority, but I think it'd be way fewer than that. It'll be quite a battle. I mean, they may restrict it to, what people thought Roe v. Wade originally was legalized it in the first trimester. Most people didn't realize that it legalized it for the whole process, all the way to 9 months. Because of this flimsy thing, unless a woman's health is affected. Well, that was a really low bar, because they could say, well, I'm going to be depressed if I have to have this child, and I decided this after 8.5 months. And so, okay, good. It's enough to have an abortion by whatever method. So it always was that way.
Yeah.
And so that,
all right.
States will be able to restrict it that way. Probably that's what you'll see.
Yeah.
It'll be incremental. All right, so Soros, for years now, this is for probably 7-8 years, he has been spending millions of dollars, and it was curious to conservatives. Why would he spend millions to elect district attorneys all around the country, especially in big cities? And, well, okay. Well, now we're seeing why. Because as these protests are turning into riots, then people in so many cities are they're being arrested, but they're not being charged. Cops will take them into jail, they're released right away. And the local DAs, many of whom have taken up to $1.5 million in some cases from Soros to get elected, are just not pressing charges. They're not pressing charges for shoplifting and several other issues, charges where they normally did, but especially during these riots. So cops arrest somebody, they're right back on the street. And they're arrested again, they're right back on the street. So there is no incentive to stop rioting. The law is not being enforced. And so Rand Paul said, quote, law enforcement needs to look at the funding of violent criminal activity like this, and national Democrats need to confront it. It's organized, it's paid for, it's violent, it's not about black lives or any lives. It's about anarchy and destruction, which he personally witnessed when he was just left the part of the Republican National Convention that was being held in the White House somewhere. He left and was going to his hotel, and he was accosted. I don't know if you saw any of that videotape. There were about 15 different people with their cell phones. He and his wife were scared. They had a phalanx of cops around them to protect them, and people were going after them. And I mean, this is a U.S. senator.
Didn't he get beat up by his neighbor over?
Yeah,
he got beat up by his neighbor, right? Rand Paul's an interesting guy.
He is.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had to get in a dispute with his neighbor over his lawn or
I don't
some
understand the
crazy
root
thing.
of that, but
I
he
mean,
was really.
Yeah, he was.
He was.
He's not.
Well, you could
adverse
say
to finding himself in those situations. I don't think.
He was identified as a Republican, leaving the convention. And if you saw the tape, you heard the comments of the BLM and Antifa people around him that were going after him. They're masked and so forth. And it wasn't because, it was because he was a Republican senator.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I don't know what your point is. The
point is that there's anarchy in the streets, and that I think he's right when he says it's organized, it's paid for, and it's about anarchy and destruction. And George Soros set the stage for this, but enabling it to continue, which is why we're having it.
You think this anarchy is like a big threat that's going on now? Does that bother you? I mean, it's all the protests.
Yes, it does, and I think it may become. I think it already has eclipsed COVID as the primary issue that's in voters' minds as they go to the polls on November 3rd.
Actually,
because Democrats didn't say anything about it during their convention while it was going on all over the country. I brought it up to you here. I said, you didn't think it was happening, that there were riots and arson and
I think it's happening.
Bomb tossing and so forth.
I think, I mean, it's just really a matter of degree. I think it's happening, and I think anybody can condone, we all should condone the violence on both sides, because there are also some right-wingers who are doing it too, like the Umbrella Man in Minnesota. The Umbrella Man, he's the one who started the original riot in Minneapolis. He went around and set a AutoZone on fire or something, and then it started it. So, and Homeland Security just came out with a report that said the biggest domestic threat is from right-wing militia, not Antifa. And then the other thing is that there are polls, and this is one of the things that confounds me, and I know you're, as a true conservative, you're fired up about this, but I certainly, there are millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people who've been protesting, hundreds of thousands gather in Washington, New York City, and they're peaceful. Yes, there have been ones that have gotten out of control and violent, and I don't think anybody, including the mayor of Chicago and all these mayors, condone it. But it's not in the people's mind because it's not a big deal. There was a survey that I saw that said only 8%, it's like way down, that only 8% of the Republicans and Democrats consider that a major issue in this election, because it just doesn't.
What percent?
8. It's just not a big deal. There are a few, Rochester, there are a few places, and they're struggling with it, and that's the way it always is. But it's really, it goes back to the Vietnam War type of things, where the conservatives said, all the throwing out the whole anti-war movement because the SDS was blowing up some buildings. Well, regular people who are against the war didn't condone blowing up buildings in the same way the Black Lives Matter and all the social justice warriors aren't condoning the violence, they're just protesting. So I just think you're just way overblowing it. And
Black Lives Matter is an organization that was started by Marxists, and it was started to defeat capitalism and overthrow the government of the United States. And it was based on lies from Trayvon Martin. When it originated, these two ladies started it based on the Trayvon Martin case. And then they went from there to the Ferguson case over in the Midwest. The big kid that claimed to be shot in the back and was about to surrender, and turns out he wasn't. And now to the George Floyd case, which that hasn't been distorted. The actual, I won't say there are lies about that. I mean, but the first two cases where Black Lives Matter was involved.
It gets at a broader issue, and I know we disagree. You don't think there's systemic racism, and I'm just and I don't, and we can have that discussion. I'm just saying is that on the issue of violence in the streets, it's just way overblown. It's just way overblown.
Okay, you think so?
I do.
And most Democrats do.
No, most people do. The polls show that most people do.
Well, I don't know what polls you see, but all of a sudden, the Democrats decided, after first ignoring the issue and not mentioning it all during their convention, and mainstream media, who we don't agree on this, but I believe are in the sack with Democrats, chose not to televise any of it. So when I brought it up to you at an earlier show, you said, well, I don't watch Fox News, as if it's only you only see these things on Fox News.
I mean, it's not only, but I look.
But then there were internal polls by the Democrats. All of a sudden they realized, holy smokes, people are really paying attention to this. And they're really upset by this. Now all of a sudden we have to come out and acknowledge that it's happening, and then of course blame Trump for it. It's Trump's racism that caused all these riots.
That's just the Republican
That was a shift that we saw just about 2 weeks ago.
What, and there's more reporting, you're saying, on the violence?
No, that the Democrats all of a sudden acknowledge it, that it is happening, after completely ignoring it for all the time. When did it start? May. Okay, so all summer it was going on. And then only about 2 or 3 weeks ago have they even acknowledged that it's happening.
I mean, how can I even address the generality when you say
think it's nothing?
No, I don't think it's nothing. I can only say it 5 different times. We cannot condone any violence on both sides. I'm just saying the scale of it is minuscule, and most people in the country, it's not a major issue because it's not that prevalent. I mean, there are some cities that are definitely having an issue with it for sure. I'm not denying that at all. But to say that it's like a big national issue, it just isn't.
If you have a business in a city like Portland, Oregon, and you had to shut down for COVID for several months, and then all of a sudden you're just beginning to open up in a limited basis and have a few meals on the sidewalk if you're a restaurant or something, and then all of a sudden along comes the riots every single night for over 100 nights. Now my grandson, I just drove him to the airport Monday morning. He's been home for 3 weeks. He's been living there for 2 years, working in Portland, Oregon. He lives just across the river in Washington State. Every day he drives to Portland. And he said, it's madness. He said he won't drive through the city anymore. Well, he will on the highway. The express highway goes right through, but he won't go anywhere in downtown Portland. He won't if I leave my car there, I'm going to be confronted by people who are going to ask me about my politics, people with masks on. And if I am not on their side, then they're going to trash my car.
Okay, well, I can't address that. I can't address that. I mean, I'm not saying. I mean, I don't want to say that.
And
I mean,
it's probably worse in Portland, or maybe also in Seattle would be equivalent. Okay, but it's happening in many other cities as well.
Okay.
And guess who runs these cities?
Oh yes, it's the old Democrats, right? They're all Democrats. Everything that's
They
bad
are.
because they're Democrat controlled.
They are. It's indisputable.
Yeah.
So that's what you,
So
you
we
say
should
it's
blame
no
the
big deal.
Republic.
People aren't concerned about it. I'm afraid you're wrong about this.
So the
part.
Republic, no, they aren't concerned. Well, we'll just see, but it's not.
I guess we
look,
will.
Our editor's daughter lives in Seattle, middle of Seattle. That's not a big issue in Seattle. I mean, there may be some sections there could have been some protests, but I'm just saying it's just not a big issue. It isn't.
And cops don't do a thing to them.
You're just telling me the stories that you want to story. I can't. You're saying
They're
cops
eyewitness.
don't do a thing.
That's what my grandson has seen.
All right, so your grandson. Well, then base all your whole view of these protests on your grandson. That's great. I can't dispute
news
that.
reports that I read, but evidently
Look,
you don't.
No, I read them. Look, even when I was watching even a month or two ago when there were more riots, I'd see a little bit on the CNN, and then you'd go to, night after night after night, it's on Hannity. That's all he did. So that's what they do, and that's why the Republicans, Fox News gins it up, and that's part of the reason why you think it's a big deal. And National Post
Fox News reports on it.
They gin it
CNN
up.
does not.
It's a priority. It's a priority for
That's
them.
the difference. It's happening. It's either reported or it's not reported.
All right, Bill, can you do a quick Google on how bad is there any stats out there that says how much rioting is going on now? So you want to switch? Speaking of the virus, last time we spoke, or at least a couple times ago, you said you thought, I'm thinking that it's overblown with the violence. You think the virus is overblown. Do you consider it's still overblown?
Yes.
And what? And how? So the 200,000 deaths, and we're the worst in the world, and all that stuff.
Well, did you read my column?
I did. I didn't quite
week?
understand it, actually, what you were saying. But
Well, the 200,000 deaths are not all of COVID. As the CDC said, 6% are indisputably COVID alone. The other, whoops, forgot to turn this off, sorry about that. The other 94,000, the other 94% of the deaths, there might be COVID in part of the diagnosis, but something else killed them. COVID might have contributed, might not have contributed, but they are called COVID deaths if there's any COVID in the death, in the death certificate. Or somebody died of in a motorcycle accident. It was called COVID death until that was pretty ridiculous. So the guy had COVID, but he died of a motorcycle accident. You can't really put that in and that kind of opened it up. And people began to look and scrutinize, what is actually killing these people. So it's not. You have anybody in the whole population has less than 99% chance of dying of COVID. If they get it, they're going to have mild symptoms or no symptoms, or they might be hospitalized for a little while, but will survive it. That there's no justification for the onerous reaction that we have had to this to shut down the whole economy and very reluctantly open it up. And I thought I made the case pretty clearly that many of us, I can't prove to you that this is completely politicized. I strongly suspect that it is, because blue states are not opening up. Everything we see in mainstream media, if I get the Boston Globe, I subscribe to it. Every day, that's their lead story. So many people have tested positive for COVID, and this is how many deaths we've had, which are declining. And it's hyped. It's enormously hyped. It's worse than the flu, yes. It's not so bad as the 1918 flu, clearly not even close. To have reacted the way we have is I think we're going to look back on this in not too distant future, a year maybe, 2 years, and we're going to say, holy smokes, we really overreacted. We should not have done this. We shouldn't have shut down everything.
All right, can I?
Go ahead.
Okay, so number one is that this whole idea of COVID assigned deaths. You heard of the concept of excess deaths, right?
Excess
deaths. You can predict how many deaths are going to be in any country at any time. So,
Okay.
we
have these statistics. Life
actuarial.
insurance
So like in,
policies,
in the winter of 2018, we had a spike. And like an extra 20, 30,000 people died in this country than they expected. It turned out to be a really bad flu year. So they can assign that. So when you look at the excess deaths over this last year, they're pretty much, we got like almost a couple 100,000 excess deaths. So they are related to COVID. Now, is it a primary cause? You just mentioned obesity. How many people on their death certificate says he died because he was too fat?
Well, my father died 'cause he
maybe the
was too fat.
600-pound guy, but obviously obesity causes and contributes to all these other illnesses.
Yes, it does.
So it's the same thing with COVID. It is an accelerant. It's this. It's that. It's dangerous. So the idea that I mean, we've had extra 200,000 people die over this last year, and than we normally expected, and they all have COVID. So to say that somehow COVID's just not that important or not that dangerous, I think is just a false statement. We've had 200,000 extra people die.
I didn't say it's not that dangerous. I said that it is overblown.
Okay, so then now we get to where we are now, and we obviously, our country has the worst statistics by anybody. Any country in the world, highest percentage, there's more deaths, all that stuff. So now we get to, if you look at the map, which states have it under control? Your democratically controlled states. If you look at the country, the map looks like a Republican-Democrat map where the middle of the country is all red, Republican.
Yeah.
And those are the ones where there's like 25 states now where the virus is accelerating. And California's getting better, the East Coast is getting better, and it's because we've handled it right. And when you look at other countries,
Getting better. Can you
I mean, we have just
define
low infection rates.
that? Okay.
We have there's like 40,000.
Not the low death rate.
Oh, the death
low
rate.
infection rate.
Well, the death rate I think is going down a little bit, but we're still chalking them up.
Are there more people dying in red states than blue states? Is that what you're trying to imply?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
No, and isn't that the bottom line?
No, but what
Are people getting it? Do you realize how many people have gotten it and didn't even know they had it?
I realize that.
Most of them.
I realize that.
And they may have had it all the way along, and now they're being tested. They're not new cases, are they?
But the question,
they're newly discovered cases.
The question is what to do about it. And that the countries that have had these lockdowns, severe, Singapore, South Korea, Germany, Russia, China, all the ones that have had these extreme lockdowns have been the one most successful. Australia, New Zealand have been the most successful in controlling it. So it's really not a question. It's a dangerous thing. People die from it. And it's a question of how do you control it?
Controlling how many people get it.
Get it, yeah, exactly. Because if more
you
people...
don't believe, then, that most of us are going to get it over time?
No way. They did it, as Trump would say, what did he call it? Herd mentality?
Yeah.
He called it herd mentality, right. But his total faculties are fine to herd mentality. So this idea of herd immunity, we would have to get to, there's only been like there's been 6 million cases in the country. So that's whatever that is, 3 or 4% of the people. To get herd
discovered so far.
Yeah, to get herd.
There may be way more than that we have not discovered.
Well, if we had more testing, we know, but we know about the rates. We know about the general rates. So that to get to herd immunity, you'd have to have 65% of the country have it, and for that, you would end up with millions of people dead.
We may be already, I don't know what the statistics are, but you say 6 million out of 300 million, and whatever percentage that is, I expect the percentage of people who already have it and have had it for months is way higher than that. We have not yet discovered that they have it.
Well, the testing is pretty good. I mean, we should do more testing, but we've had that. So the question is,
I would dispute the way they're characterized as new cases. We don't know that they're new cases. I will say they're newly discovered cases, and they may be new cases. And what's the difference between the two? We have no way of knowing.
Okay, but the point is that to get the herd immunity, we'd have to get to be 65 or 70% of the people.
That's what they say, yeah.
Yeah, and that would result in like 3 million people dead. So if you're willing to take that, I mean, that's just the facts. That's just the
Okay.
science.
Well,
and then you get Boris Johnson. Like, you're a big fan of Boris Johnson, right?
I am, yeah, I like
So now he almost
well, compared to his opposition.
right.
Anyway,
So and
yeah.
I know that you've said before that the 200,000 people, they're mostly older.
He
and
nearly
they're,
died of it, I
They're
know.
dead. They're all going to die in a nursing home anyway. So I guess Boris Johnson would fit in that category for you, right?
He did have he had a hard road with
Yeah,
it.
he was in the ICU and he almost died.
Yeah.
So now, and he was one of the early ones. And 4 or 5 months ago, the deniers had the countries that denied it and had everything open was us, and Russia, and Brazil, and England, and they had some of the worst cases. So now,
And Sweden.
Well, Sweden is a whole other story, as we've talked about. But now, Boris Johnson, just the other day, you saw what he did, right? So
No, I didn't hear what he did
okay,
the other
so
day.
he's doubling the fines because masks are mandatory in England, and he's doubling the fines for not wearing masks, and he's threatening that we might have to have a 6-month lockdown because they're getting another
So
wave.
is Joe Biden.
Joe Biden what?
Is also saying he's threatening a mask mandate if he's elected, and he is saying I'm going to shut down the country if we have a second wave.
Well, I mean, maybe that's the right thing to do. If we just if we shut it down for 6 weeks, we'd be done with it. I'm not saying I don't want that, but I'm saying what we've done with this spotty thing, and of course with Trump misleading us all this time. I mean, you heard the tapes with Bob Woodward, of course.
I did.
And what do you think of those, by the way?
I think he said he wanted to avoid panicking the population. I think that is what he was trying to do.
But he said it was deadly stuff, and he called it a plague.
Yep. I think he regrets. Well, he was.
I don't think
what he
Trump
really,
regrets
I don't know
anything.
what he really thinks versus what he says. I can't claim to know what's
Right.
in his head. All right, but my guess would be that he was watching it politically, and when it came out, he said, "Oh my gosh, I'm up for re-election this year. I have to at least appear to be doing something." And he keeps touting how he cut off traffic from China, anybody
Which he
coming
didn't.
in, which he did.
No, he didn't. He cut off. He did what he didn't cut off, and why we got in so much trouble. The Republicans always say, "Oh, he cut off China. He saved us." And he's cutting off China, and he saved us. But we didn't. What happened
didn't
was
save us.
the
He did do that.
the expats came back, and they were all
Yes,
infected.
that's
There's
true,
like
they did.
40,000 or
Yeah.
80,000 came back, and
did.
that's why. So other countries were stopping everybody at the airport.
Most of them to New York.
Yeah, and we didn't. We didn't.
York City.
Yeah, exactly. And from Europe, we didn't stop traffic in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's but
Until
the
later.
The funny thing with Bob Woodward, I mean, it is amazing. Talk about insight, because into Trump is that he actually think he could outsmart Bob Woodward by calling him all those times for this interview. Like, Bob Woodward just can't believe it.
I know it.
Like, every president knows there's going to be a Bob Woodward bad book, and Obama interviewed only for an hour because he's trying to limit his loss, and there's Trump thinking he could outsmart him. And there was a little story about how he was so he's got this, as we know, he's narcissistic and there's this ego. Like, he would call him, and his aides would think he was nuts.
Yeah.
And Bob Woodward's wife Esther, I think, Bob Woodward would say he had to carry a recorder around with him because he never knew when he was going to call him, a tape recorder. And then it was and his wife Esther said she answered the phone once, and it's literally President Trump saying, "Is Bob there?" And she said, "Who's calling?" He says, "It's Donald Trump." And she said, "Yes, Mr. President." I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It is.
And his lying, of course.
But that's the way he is, isn't it? I mean, he if he's going from his plane to something else, he'll answer questions along the way. He'll have an impromptu press conference. He's available. I mean, he takes questions from everybody at a press conference, even those he knows are going to be hostile questions from NPR and from he does it. He fields them all. That has never happened. We've never seen a president do that. Even Kennedy, who appeared to be that way.
What are you talking about?
Didn't do
Trump
it.
didn't have a press conference, a regular. I can't. This is another Google thing, but he's gone the longest without having a press conference than any
He
president.
has them all the time.
He speaks to the reporters, but he doesn't have official press conferences, I don't think.
But he takes their questions, he answers them. Okay, you might say an officially called press conference when he's in whatever it is, whatever room they have it in, this tiny room in the White House, or on the lawn or whatever. I mean, I would call them little press conferences and big press conferences, but he has them.
Most presidents have talked to. I don't know how we can compare that.
Not formal ones that he announces ahead of time.
But I do know that the fact that he had the gall, not the gall, but the hubris to talk to Bob
He does
Woodward
have
for
that.
18 times and think he was going to
I know.
outsmart him. And this is the bill just brought that up. So,
What did you ask him for?
well, about the number of demonstrations. So this is a little chart, if we can see it here.
Demonstrations.
Yeah, so it goes 1 minute.
What did he say? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, there's a little chart that shows how many there were back in May and June and how few there are now.
Right, but we still have them.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And they're riots.
Right.
Okay, one more thing because we don't have much time left.
that a
You were
minute?
talking about masks and so forth. And
Yeah.
how this is New England Journal of Medicine in May. Last paragraph. It's also clear that masks serve symbolic roles. Masks are not only tools, they're also talismans that may help increase healthcare workers' perceived sense of safety, well-being, and trust in their hospitals. Although reactions may not be strictly logical, we're all subject to fear and anxiety, especially during times of crisis. One may argue that fear and anxiety are better countered with data and education than a marginally beneficial mask, particularly in light of the worldwide mask shortage. But it's difficult to get clinicians to hear this message in the heat of the current crisis. Expanded masking protocols' greatest contribution may be to reduce the transmission of anxiety over and above whatever role they may play in reducing transmission of COVID-19. The potential vast value of universal masking in giving healthcare workers the confidence to absorb and implement the more foundational infection prevention practices described above may be its greatest contribution. Basically says that masks are ineffective except
It did
in
say it
healthcare.
ineffective. It said it could be more effective in making people feel better. One, and number two, that's in May. And so we've learned a lot.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot then. We know it's not transmitted on surfaces so much. And it's just, and every health expert is saying mask, and it's just common sense.
I cleared this, also the column that I wrote, I cleared it with 2 doctors.
Yeah.
I said, how am I medically correct in this? And he said, nobody knows what's going on. There are studies so conflicting and so
exactly.
all over the map. He said, we just don't know. Time's up. Okay. Well, it's been fun, usual. We didn't cover as many things as we thought we might, but we covered some.
So we have 1 more month before the election, right?
Yeah.
And
I
you
think
predicted
so.
last time that Biden wouldn't debate, but he is.
Well, we'll
So
see
far.
when he does it. We'll see when he does it.
And
If he goes to 1 debate, I'll concede.
Okay, and then who do you think is going to win the election right now?
Well, Trump. And you don't.
Nah, not a chance.
Okay. Thank you, folks. See you in a couple of weeks with somebody else.